The clock is no longer silent. Its ticking now echoes across continents, vibrating through the oil fields of the Middle East, the war rooms of Washington, and the missile silos buried beneath Iranian soil. What was once measured in cautious diplomacy and indirect threats has now become a countdown, a loud, unforgiving timer pointing toward an event the world hoped to avoid: direct confrontation between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America. For decades there have been whispers, accusations exchanged like cold breaths in shadowed corridors, cyber attacks hidden beneath layers of denial, sanctions hurled across oceans, and assassinations executed with chilling precision. But throughout it all, there remained space, thin and fragile, for de-escalation. That space is gone now. Iran's latest move is not a statement, it is a declaration. The language is clear. The deadline has been set, and this is no bluff wrapped in diplomatic language. It is a line carved into the earth, one side painted with pride and sovereignty, the other bristling with military might and strategic pressure. Tehran has made it unmistakably clear: if its core demands are not met, whether over nuclear enrichment, the lifting of sanctions, or territorial defense, it will respond not through words but action. And this time, America is listening. Not through the hum of wiretaps or satellite imagery, but with the unmistakable sense that the final curtain on proxy wars is falling. Washington's silence in recent hours is not peace, it is the breath before the plunge. The American military machine is repositioning quietly, but swiftly. Aircraft carriers are moving, strategic bombers are being prepped, diplomats are leaving, embassies are watching the hourglass empty grain by grain. This is not just about Iran or America anymore. The entire world is beginning to listen to that same ticking clock. Israel is on high alert, its Iron Dome scanning for signs of escalation. Russia, no stranger to timing conflict for strategic advantage, is watching closely, perhaps with opportunity in mind. China, forever patient but never passive, weighs its response behind closed doors. And the Gulf states brace themselves, knowing that if war breaks out, it won't respect national borders or diplomatic fences. Iran's warning is deeply rooted in a sense of historical timing. In its view, the oppression has lasted long enough. Sanctions have choked its economy, covert operations have killed its leaders, and now, with its regional alliances hardened and its missile capabilities matured, Tehran believes the moment has come. It has measured its strength not just in arms but in resolve, and now it wants to test America's. But time is an illusion when emotion runs high. Deadlines, once theoretical, are now material. They can be seen in the movements of troops, in the coded language of foreign ministers, and in the silent migration of capital away from vulnerable markets. The clock ticks, not just for Iran or the United States, but for a global order that has long held itself together through fragile rules and uneasy balances. This is the sound before the storm, the moment before the sky splits. And as the deadline draws near, the world doesn't just wait, it holds its breath, because some clocks don't tick to mark time, they tick to warn. Diplomacy is the art of buying time, of extending handshakes across deep divides, of stitching torn flags back together with the thread of language. But some wounds are too old, some betrayals too deep. In the case of Iran and the United States, diplomacy was never a graceful dance, it was a battlefield dressed in formal wear, and now the pretense has fallen away. The table has been flipped, the ink has dried, only to be drowned by the rising sound of boots and bombs. Shattered diplomacy isn't just a metaphor, it is the reality we now face. It began decades ago, a spiral of distrust birthed in revolution and forged in hostage crises, coups, and sanctions. Every administration on both sides claimed to seek peace, yet every meeting carried a knife in its sleeve. The nuclear deal of 2015 offered a brief glimmer of progress. Iran agreed to restrict its nuclear program in exchange for economic relief. But even then, suspicion lingered. It was not a peace built on trust, but on cautious verification. And in 2018, that fragile agreement was torn apart with the stroke of a pen when the US unilaterally withdrew, reigniting a fire that never fully died. Since then, diplomacy has been a ghost spoken of, but never seen. Negotiations in Vienna collapsed under the weight of preconditions and political egos. Washington demanded full compliance before relief. Tehran demanded relief before compliance. The talks circled like vultures, spiraling downward but never landing. Each new attempt was greeted with skepticism. Every olive branch weighed for poison. What remained was a hollow performance. Diplomats flying across continents only to return with the same empty phrases and colder handshakes. Sanctions deepened. Iranian enrichment resumed. Cyber warfare escalated. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020 by a US drone strike marked a deadly blow not just to Iran's military leadership, but to whatever diplomatic frameworks still existed. Tehran responded with missile strikes calculated to avoid full-blown war, but forceful enough to send a message: we are not afraid to retaliate. Yet even then, both nations avoided the cliff's edge, not because of diplomacy, but because of calculation. That calculation has changed. Iran has grown bolder, not weaker. Despite its economic challenges, it has found strength in its alliances, in Russia, in China, in the militant groups it backs across the region. It no longer believes America will return to the table in good faith, and so it has flipped the script. No more waiting for diplomacy to work. No more gestures of goodwill. Instead, deadlines, ultimatums. The tone has shifted from negotiation to confrontation. On the American side, patience is wearing thin. Political pressure grows at home. Allies in the region demand action. And with every Iranian missile test, every bold declaration from Tehran's military leaders, Washington sees less incentive to sit down and more reason to prepare for conflict. There is no longer a shared language. Even silence has become a threat. The embers of diplomacy now flicker in the wind. The Middle East, once balanced delicately on the hope of de-escalation, now feels the weight of inevitability. Once the question was, will they talk? Now it is, when will they strike? And yet, amid the ruins of diplomacy, something more dangerous emerges. A belief on both sides that words are now useless, that the only remaining message must be written in force, that peace was never possible. And when both sides believe that war is no longer a matter of possibility, it becomes a matter of timing. For years, the confrontation between Iran and the United States played out like a shadow war. Rarely did the two nations clash directly. Instead, they moved their pieces across the board through proxies, militias, covert operatives, and allied governments. Iran wielded Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. The United States relied on regional allies, covert CIA operations, drone warfare, and a sprawling military presence across the Gulf. It was a silent understanding: let the battle rage, but never let it reach the commanders themselves. That era, once built on strategy and misdirection, is now over. The illusion of distance is gone. The masks have been removed. What was once conducted through intermediaries has become face-to-face confrontation. Iran is no longer hiding behind its network of allies. It is stepping into the front lines with open defiance. Its Revolutionary Guard leaders no longer speak in coded language, they issue open threats. Military parades feature ballistic missiles with inscriptions promising the destruction of enemy capitals, and more than ever, Tehran's rhetoric is matched by its actions, bold, direct, unmistakable. America, too, has responded in kind. No longer content with surgical strikes against militias or intelligence-led raids, the United States has upped the ante. The killing of top Iranian figures, the targeting of weapons shipments, and the deployment of aircraft carriers to the region are not acts of quiet deterrence. They are loud declarations of presence. The message is clear: we are not watching from afar. We are here and we are ready. The proxy era was sustained by a mutual fear of escalation. Neither side wanted a war they couldn't control. Proxy battles provided a cushion, a way to bleed the other without declaring open hostility. But that cushion has worn thin. Too many lines have been crossed, too many red zones violated. The escalation has become so consistent, so emboldened, that restraint no longer serves either side's purpose. Iran has watched as its influence expanded across the Middle East. In Iraq, its sway over politics and security has grown. In Syria, its militias have fortified their positions. In Yemen, the Houthis have become more than a nuisance. They're a threat to shipping lanes vital to global trade. But these victories have also drawn direct American eyes. What once went unchecked is now in the crosshairs. Washington can no longer pretend that Iranian reach is a distant problem. It is now a front-row crisis. What changed the equation was intent. Iran is no longer simply reacting, it is initiating. Drone strikes targeting American positions in Iraq and Syria, naval confrontations in the Persian Gulf, strategic alliances with Russia and China. These are not defensive moves, they are signals of ambition. Iran no longer wants to contain the conflict, it wants to control its narrative, even if that means confrontation with a superpower. And America? It is done with ambiguity. It no longer treats the militias as separate entities, it holds Iran accountable for all attacks. The new doctrine is simple: if you back them, you own them. And if they strike, you will pay. This logic has pushed the conflict beyond the shadows and into the daylight. The proxy game, once the hallmark of modern asymmetric warfare, has ended not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap. There is no longer a safe layer of separation. The players have stepped into the arena without disguise. The regional chessboard has tilted into open ground, and the pieces are now kings and queens, not pawns and bishops. Every move is visible. Every consequence is immediate. And in this new phase, diplomacy grows quieter, while the drumbeat of direct war grows louder. There are moments in global affairs when boundaries aren't just tested, they are crossed with deliberate force. What were once understood as strategic red lines have now become smudges beneath the boots of advancing conflict. In the standoff between Iran and the United States, those red lines, once respected out of mutual caution, have been violated again and again. What remains is not diplomacy or restraint, but the growing certainty that neither side intends to back down. For decades, these red lines were clearly drawn. Iran would not attack US troops directly. The US would not target high-level Iranian commanders. Both sides avoided disrupting key economic choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz, and both maintained unspoken rules of engagement in proxy territories. But step by step, those boundaries have been obliterated. It began with targeted cyber warfare. The Stuxnet virus, widely attributed to the US and Israel, crippled Iran's nuclear centrifuges, a clear intrusion into its sovereign infrastructure. Though unacknowledged officially, it was a direct message. We can reach you even without a missile. Iran, in turn, developed sophisticated cyber capabilities of its own, launching attacks on American banks, infrastructure, and regional allies. The battlefield was expanding but still silent. Then came the shift to kinetic force. The US drone strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most powerful military strategist, marked a decisive turning point. It wasn't just a military action, it was the shattering of a long-standing red line. Iran responded by launching ballistic missiles at US bases in Iraq. Though casualties were minimal, the symbolism was seismic. Iran had retaliated openly, not through a proxy but as a nation-state. A new precedent was set. Red lines around nuclear development have also faded. Iran has resumed uranium enrichment at unprecedented levels, even breaching the limits set by the now defunct JCPOA. These actions are not hidden. They are announced. Tehran dares the international community to respond. The message is unmistakable. We will develop our capabilities on our terms. America, meanwhile, has increased surveillance flights, conducted drills with Israel and expanded its military footprint in the region, all while declaring that a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. The air is thick with contradiction, yet neither side slows down. Geography has not offered protection. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows, has become a volatile flashpoint. Iranian forces have seized commercial tankers, disrupted shipping routes, and used fast attack boats to challenge American naval presence. Each move tests the threshold for escalation. Each response edges closer to open conflict. Beyond geography and weaponry lies something even more dangerous: psychological red lines. Iran has begun targeting the very perception of American deterrence. Attacks on bases, surveillance drones downed, and public threats issued by high-ranking officials are all aimed at undermining the idea that the US still holds absolute dominance in the region. On the other hand, America's policy has become increasingly clear. Any attack, whether from a militia, a drone, or a nation, is attributed to Tehran. Responsibility is consolidated. This tightening noose of accountability pulls both sides closer to confrontation. In international affairs, red lines exist to signal thresholds of tolerance. When they are crossed without consequence, they lose meaning. But when both sides decide to enforce them at once, what follows is not diplomacy, it is war. Iran and the United States have now reached that critical junction. The lines are not only crossed, they've been trampled. What's left is open ground, raw with tension and stripped of ambiguity. The game has changed, and the next move will not be quiet. What happens between Iran and the United States is never confined to those two nations. When powers of this magnitude edge toward direct confrontation, the shockwaves ripple far beyond the borders of Tehran or Washington. The stakes are not regional, they are global. Every country, every economy, every major alliance will feel the tremor of war if the final barrier breaks. The world, whether prepared or not, is already beginning to brace itself. In the Middle East, the consequences are immediate and existential. Israel, long a vocal adversary of Iran's ambitions, stands in a state of constant readiness. Its military posture is heightened, its air defense systems fully activated, and its intelligence networks in overdrive. A war between Iran and the US all but guarantees that Israel will be drawn in, if not by choice then by the ripple of missiles, drones, or Hezbollah's activation from Lebanon's southern border. The fragile calm across the region's tense fault lines would be the first to snap. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar find themselves caught in a geopolitical vise. They host US military bases, rely on American protection, and yet live within range of Iran's expanding missile arsenal. These nations remember all too well the drone strikes on Saudi Aramco's oil facilities in 2019, which briefly crippled global oil output. That incident was a preview. What comes next could disrupt the entire energy structure of the modern world. Oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz would become targets, shipping lanes would be paralyzed, the global oil market, already vulnerable to instability, would explode in volatility. Prices could skyrocket overnight, plunging economies into uncertainty. Beyond the immediate region, superpowers are watching and positioning. Russia sees opportunity. A US-Iran war would stretch Washington's focus and military resources, potentially allowing Moscow to press further into Ukraine, expand influence in Central Asia, or negotiate from a position of leverage. Russia has already cultivated ties with Iran, supplying drones and technology, deepening a quiet alliance forged in mutual resistance to Western dominance. China, ever pragmatic, would face a strategic crossroads. As the largest importer of Iranian oil and a critical trade partner with the US, China would be forced to walk a razor-thin line. It could use the chaos to expand its presence in the Middle East, but it would also have to manage the economic fallout of a global energy crisis. In Beijing's view, instability is dangerous, but American entanglement in yet another long-term conflict might serve its ambitions of becoming the world's unchallenged economic superpower. Then comes Europe, caught between alliance and anxiety. NATO would not directly engage in a US-Iran war, but its members, particularly the UK, France and Germany, would feel the political and economic aftershocks. Refugee waves, terrorist blowback, trade disruptions, and internal divisions would rise. Europe's already fragile unity would be tested under the weight of war-driven global inflation, security threats, and diplomatic polarization. Even nations far removed geographically, India, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, would find themselves drawn into the crisis through economic ties, oil dependence, and diplomatic pressure. The global financial system, intertwined and delicate, does not respond well to war between giants. Markets would plunge, currencies would fluctuate, central banks would scramble to contain the damage. And then there's the people. Civilians across the region would face air raids, economic collapse, and displacement. The world would see a new wave of refugees, a fresh crisis in humanitarian aid, and the return of war coverage dominating global headlines. This is not just about missiles and borders. It's about systems, energy, finance, diplomacy, religion, and culture, all being thrown into turmoil by two nations, choosing confrontation over negotiation. When giants collide, the world does not watch from a distance. It shakes. Beneath the headlines, beyond the missiles and military briefings, lies a deeper layer of this looming conflict, one shaped not only by politics and power, but by belief. The standoff between Iran and the United States is not just a geopolitical chess match. It is a collision of worldviews, a confrontation laced with spiritual undertones, political mythologies, and prophetic narratives that each side believes are unfolding in real time. This is not just a war of weapons, it is in many minds a war of destiny. In Iran, the Islamic Republic was born out of a revolution infused with religious ideology. It did not just overthrow a monarch. It declared itself the standard-bearer of resistance against global arrogance, particularly American imperialism. Its leaders do not speak merely in terms of strategy. They speak of martyrdom, divine justice, and the long-awaited return of the Mahdi, the prophesied redeemer in Shia Islam. For many within Iran's leadership and population, resisting the United States is not merely patriotic, it is sacred. Every confrontation, every sanction, every drone strike only deepens this belief that they are standing on the side of divine truth against a decaying empire. This theological worldview influences Iran's political decisions in ways many Western analysts underestimate. The pursuit of nuclear capability, the support of militias across the Middle East, and the willingness to absorb economic hardship are not always based on rational calculations alone. They are fueled by a belief that Iran plays a key role in the moral reordering of the world. It sees itself not as a regional actor, but as a prophetic voice, challenging corruption and tyranny on a global scale. On the other side, the United States is not spiritually neutral either. Throughout its history, American foreign policy has often been shaped by a sense of divine mission, of spreading freedom, democracy, and order. Whether in speeches invoking God's blessing upon our troops, or the belief in manifest destiny that shaped its early expansion, American identity has long blended politics with providence. In recent decades, the fusion of evangelical Christian support for Israel, apocalyptic interpretations of Middle Eastern events, and the portrayal of America as the defender of Judeo-Christian values, has created its own spiritual lens through which conflict is viewed. This has far-reaching consequences. For many Americans, especially within certain political and religious circles, the idea of confronting Iran isn't just about national security. It's about protecting biblical prophecy, defending Israel, and fulfilling a perceived divine calling to stand against forces labeled as evil. This rhetoric may not dominate every political platform, but it runs deep, especially in the background of public opinion and policy making. Both nations, then, are driven by more than strategy. They are guided by stories, sacred ones. Iran views America as Dajjalic, deceptive, the modern face of oppression foretold in Islamic end-time narratives. Some within America view Iran as part of the Gog and Magog axis, a prophetic enemy to be confronted before the return of Christ. These aren't just myths for pulpits or mosques, they are embedded in the hearts of real decision-makers, military leaders, and populations ready to see divine meaning in geopolitical movements. It is this collision of spiritual narratives that makes the situation so volatile. When people believe history is being written by divine will, compromise becomes weakness, and conflict becomes sacred duty. Diplomacy falters in the face of destiny. Ceasefires are seen not as peace but as delay, and every explosion, every speech, every sanction takes on a weight far heavier than strategy. It becomes part of a prophetic unfolding, a drama in which nations are not merely actors but chosen instruments. This is why the crisis feels so profound. Because for many on both sides, it's not just about land, oil, or pride, it's about the fulfillment of what they believe has been written long ago. Conclusion. We now stand at a moment that feels less like a crossroads and more like a cliff. What began as subtle maneuvering has escalated into open declarations, breached red lines, and shattered diplomatic foundations. Iran has drawn its line in the sand, issuing deadlines instead of dialogue. The United States, resolute in its stance, is preparing for confrontation rather than conciliation. The era of shadow wars has ended, the veil has been lifted, and with that, the world must now face the stark reality that a direct war is not just possible, it is dangerously close to inevitable. But this conflict is not merely about borders or sanctions. It carries with it a chorus of historical grievances, spiritual convictions, political myths, and prophetic dreams. Each side believes it holds a divine or moral mandate. Each side sees itself as the guardian of order in a world teetering on chaos. And in such a climate where belief and strategy intertwine, the danger is no longer in what is said but in what is believed to be destined. The world watches not as a neutral observer, but as a stage already affected. Allies are choosing sides. Markets are trembling. Civilians across multiple regions are preparing for fallout. And while leaders speak of defense, economies brace for impact, and soldiers prepare for orders that may soon come. This is not just a geopolitical conflict. It is a spiritual, psychological, and global reckoning. One that could redefine the balance of power, reshape regions, and scar generations. The clock has been ticking, and now all that remains is the moment it strikes.